Welcome to the Spirit Sessions podcast. I'm your guide, Katie Silcox, bringing you your weekly self-love soundbite. Join us where I'll help you find your true spiritual home, where every single aspect of you is holy ground, holy ground, holy ground, holy ground.
This is Spirit Session Podcast with Katie Silcox. Venga chicos, empezamos. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hi everyone, Katie here. This podcast is intended to inspire you, educate you, and most importantly, support you on your journey towards knowing who you really are, that inner self, that inner teacher. I am not a psychologist or a medical doctor and do not offer professional health or medical advice on this podcast. If you are suffering from any kind of psychological or medical issue, please do the right thing and seek help from your qualified health professional. Hey out there in podcast land, it's your girl, Katie Silcox. We've got a really cool offering for you in the podcast today. I am going to provide the first 60 minutes of a much longer workshop with Dr. Kirsten Mackey. She's one of the core teachers in the Shakti school, and she's a really cutting edge doctor who is beginning to integrate the most powerful practices on the planet that are involving your mouth, your tongue, and your breath. And I know it may sound out there, but what the yogis knew thousands and thousands of years ago about the importance of the breath and the position of the tongue, modern science now is just beginning to catch up. And so I really feel passionately about this because I began exploring this a few years ago for my own personal journey and my own personal health. And I can tell you it's been a game changer to learn the basic tongue positions, to learn about some of the corrective upper palate and lower palate devices that are on the market, and just some basic breathing practices that can really alter your chemistry and your physiology. Now, what's super important to know about this podcast is that obviously seek out your professional medical advice, but please dive into this if you are struggling with things as diverse as brain fog, digestive issues, anxiety, depression, insomnia. I mean, guys, the list could go on and on. These are things that I've definitely dealt with, and I know so many of our listeners deal with. So much of this can be ameliorated, at least partially, through the proper tongue position, the proper chewing, the proper breathing. So this is definitely a podcast you can tell I feel so excited to offer you, because one of the goals in my life is to help remove suffering on the planet, and certainly in myself, and to really move towards true happiness. And so I hope that you are inspired by Dr. Mackey, and I also hope that you will share this with anyone in your life that you may feel has some of these issues. All right, enjoy this really special podcast. So today's podcast is brought to you by one of my favorite companies. We've had them on the pod before, female-founded Embodied Ayurveda. They are making artisan lines of small batch, pure, organic Ayurveda products. They're making them up there in Northern California, you guys. This is the stuff that I personally use. They are handcrafted. These gals know what they're doing. They are raising consciousness through their products. Their offerings are cruelty-free, vegan, and they really do a great job at selecting herbal ingredients that are sustainable, which really matters. There's a lot of over-harvesting of these Ayurvedic herbs. So they're helping out, making sure that the plant medicine is abundant for many generations. In addition to those amazing formulations, why I love this company, their marketing is amazing. Go follow them on Instagram. It's beautiful. But also all of their stuff comes in glass bottles. let me tell you, as a businesswoman, that is a labor of love. Their products are in glass to maintain the integrity of those herbs. They're amazing. Their stuff's printed on recycled paper stock, all the good things. So I really recommend that you get your Ayurveda products from Pavani. You will be supporting a woman, female-founded business, small business that helps you maintain your health. And their products are incredible. I use their body oils. They have an amazing coconut milk bath powder. Make sure to get some of that. And really everything. I love all of their products. So thanks, Pavani, for sponsoring this podcast. Well, hello, everybody. How are we doing out there in Zoom world? So this is basically a long time coming. We have one of Shakti School's favorite teachers back with us. She doesn't need an introduction for you all, but just in case for anyone new joining us now or later, Dr. Kirsten Mackey, in addition to being a dear friend of mine, is a board-certified family medicine physician and traditional osteopath with specialty training in functional and holistic medicine. She has a bunch of degrees from lots of prestigious places, but more importantly, she is also an ardent seeker, student, spirit mama, all around healer woman. And we love Kirsten. And we really want to just provide a place for some of the world's greatest teachers and healers to bring forth what is very cutting edge. And today is one of those days. Kirsten is going to be talking about something that is really epidemic in our society that a lot of institutions would do very well in knowing about. And we provide that for you guys here so you can have it for your personal information, as well as your friends, family members. And I know many of you see clients, your coaches, your yoga teachers, your healers yourselves. And so I personally have benefited a lot from the topic matter that we will be talking about today. And Kirsten was like, hey, Katie, you should tell your personal story about your own journey with your mouth and your tongue. And I said to her, I know it's going to happen, but I'm not ready because I'm still in the middle of the journey. And so just know this is really near and dear to my heart. I think that you'll find what she shares with you today to be nothing short of revolutionary. And there's a reason why the ancient yogis were obsessed with their tongue and getting their tongue to touch their palate. And in some cases, even snipping their tongue so they could get it further back. They're not just wacko weirdos. They are wise women, right? Wise men. So before I hand the mic over to Kirsten, I want to just take a moment to sit with you guys and to remember the eagle eye vision of why we do everything that we do here at Shakti School. We're going to work to just remember our freedom. And so just take a moment to settle in. This is sacred time and sacred space. You can shut down your phone and close out other windows. Let your eyes relax. That may mean closing them. And just sense the tongue resting softly on the upper palate, behind the teeth. We're calling in the forces of healing, both internal and external, that they be with us here today as we embark in this next spirit sessions. I'm just feeling this connection to the downward flow of energy. You can imagine a waterfall just dropping down the back of your body. Feeling yourself now coming down through the head, the real you, the presence of you dropping into your throat, the real you that is beyond our identities, our age, our background, and yes, even our thoughts and conditioning. Feel it dropping down into your heart. Down into the belly. All the way through the legs, and just feel that downward arriving, knowing that really our job as spiritual practitioners is to make the body a locus, a place, and point of presence. That's our duty, to just be fully in here and present. Setting this last intention, may this class be for the benefit of ourselves and all of the women here and all of the people that will listen to this later, and perhaps the lives of the men and children and women that this information may touch, that we may not even be aware of. And so just holding that intention, feel free to set your own. And we'll slowly start to open the eyes and feel that maybe we're all a little more present, a little more here, as I hand it over to the illustrious and wonderful and wise and smart Dr. Kirsten Mackey. Welcome to Spirit Sessions.
Hi, good to see you all. Thanks for the intro, Katie. You're looking extra beautiful today. Glowing, bright. Thanks so much for having me on. This topic is also near and dear to my heart, because I literally think about this stuff and see it every day. I see the impact of what it can do to a person who's really suffering, to optimize some of the things that we're going to talk about. And I can see what it can really do to somebody who hasn't gotten to have some of this stuff addressed, how it can really bog down their system as a whole. And when I can offer some sort of explanation for a complex situation that I've been experiencing sometimes for decades, it can be a big relief. So I hope that, like Katie said, we can touch you and whoever else is listening indirectly in some way, and offer some piece of hope or promise for resolution of whatever is holding you back today. Okay, we're going to talk about the tongue, and actually, if I really accurately named and titled this talk, it would be the tongue and the breath, the unknown key to health, and how those two things really interplay and are reliant on one another. In my practice as an osteopath here in my office, the story is unique. Each person's story is unique each day. However, it's also the same, and that is that a lot of people who find osteopaths have already gone to many other practitioners, and they have this chronic, persistent pathology. Oftentimes it'll be musculoskeletal to bring them in, like neck tension or migraines or TMJ issues or upper back pain or lower back pain, those types of issues. That interview often leads us to other notable history of stuff like insomnia, fatigue, brain fog, chronic ear infection, sinus infections, tonsillitis, learning or speech delay in their past, anxiety, or their mental health. And I'm saying mental health in ear quotes, because oftentimes, in my opinion, in my training, mental health comes along with physiological, real physical, chemical, not just neurotransmitter chemical, but real physical changes that are disrupting the person as a whole and causing these mental health issues. So ADHD, learning disorders, anxiety, depression often have a physical component. And then, of course, the chronic gut imbalances, et cetera. So, and then for newborns, like here in the office, we often see a failure to thrive patient or poor weight gain, acid reflux, poor latch, poor suck, colic is a big one. And so when we dig deeper into the story and do a physical exam, osteopathic exam, they often have these same findings. And this is what I'm talking about, what I see every day. Some of these patients, not all of them, will have a high arched palate. So if you open up your mouth or look in somebody else's mouth, it's not this nice kind of arc of their palate. It's very high and tall towards their nose. The other thing I'll see is that, or I'll hear, is that they'll have a history of dental issues like braces or root canals or any oral facial trauma. Like person I just saw today fell off her bike when she was 8 years old and knocked all her teeth out. So that type of trauma to the face with concurrent sleep issues, anxiety, shoulder tension, interestingly, bladder issues, which we're going to talk about why that connects later to oral facial issues, or chronic cystitis some people have. And so that's where this talk comes in, is we're going to talk about why some of these people with these chronic issues that nobody else has been able to really get to the root of have this concurrent high arch palate, dental trauma, facial trauma, and ultimately not an optimally functioning tongue. So let's dive into this first slide. Has anyone ever heard of a homunculus here? Okay, I saw a couple no's. If you're listening to this and you don't have a visual on this, go ahead and look up the image of a homunculus later, because it's hard to describe. But basically we have this figurine who represents how many neurological connections there are to these parts of our body. And so if per capita, if the number of neurons were reflective of how big our body were, then our face and body and hands would look like this. So human beings, we're all about the hands, the mouth, the face, and the lips. You can see over on the other side of the slide here is this sort of the cortex of the brain, and this is how much space is dedicated towards function, both sensory and motor, of these areas. And so you can see literally kind of this depiction shows how much neurologically, how much of our nervous system is dedicated to the mouth and face. And so for those who can't see this, it's basically this little figurine with huge hands and huge lips and a huge tongue. And that's us. Over here, it's this tongue over here, and the face and lips. But my point is that we're all about the face and the mouth and the tongue and the hands. And you can see the thumb is bigger, right? Because we have this opposable thumb that we use a lot, right? And that kind of connects us into the brainstem, which a lot of people, I think, have heard of the brainstem. They might have heard of cranial nerves, but what does that have to do with the face? And so I wanted to just briefly talk about this. My favorite class in medical school was neuroanatomy and memorizing all these cranial nerves, because it's so pertinent to our daily existence, our daily experience, what we smell, what we feel, what we taste, all of the senses, all the sensory experience of the Ayurvedic senses, et cetera, are all funneled through these cranial nerves. And so as an osteopath, knowing what's going where, this is super important to us. We have 12 cranial nerves, coming out of our brainstem. The brainstem is still inside the cranium. So it's inside of your head, even though it's a stem. It's not yet outside of the foramen magnum here. So, and out of that stem, just like a plant has a stem, the brain has a stem. Out of that stem comes 12 different nerves. Each of them come out both sides. So there's pairs. There's a pair of first cranial nerve, second cranial nerve. You can see kind of from the top down that it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way to 12 is at the bottom of the brainstem in the pons. So we might have heard, I think it was like Adam Sandler quote in medulla oblongata. I feel like he made the popularized medulla oblongata. That's part of your brainstem. And that's where the vagus nerve actually exits. Vagus nerve is here, cranial nerve 10. And so that's why you see the X a lot with the vagus nerve, as it stands for cranial nerve 10. So all of these nerves are exiting out, and they're really creating this thing we call the nervous system, because it goes out, exits the cranium, and innervates all the things we know to do: blink, smell, move our eyes, swallow, make sure we don't choke, talk, all these very important things that make us human. So, and when we get to the tongue, we can see that, and this is just to reiterate my point, that humans are all about the tongue, right? And you can see that on this next picture, if you're looking at the slides, that there's 5 different cranial nerves alone that are dedicated to tongue. So we've got cranial nerve 10, which is the vagus nerve, and cranial nerve 9, cranial nerve 5, cranial nerve 7, and 12 all do have functions and supply the tongue. So almost half of the cranial nerves are dedicated towards some tongue function in one way or another. It doesn't really matter to get into the details of this slide, but I wanted to drive home that the nervous system is really related deeply to the tongue. And as you start doing work with the tongue, as you start changing the tongue, as you start stretching the tongue, gaining strength in the tongue, applying the tongue to the palate, swallowing different, even like Jalandhara Bandha, that kind of motion in the tongue, in the throat. As you start changing this, you're really changing your nervous system on a deep level. And it's because of these connections to the brainstem. Brainstem is our deepest reptilian survival brain. If we don't have brainstem function, we literally are brain dead. So deep work as we're working with the tongue, tread lightly. This next picture of the brainstem and cranial nerves, and again, I'm going to try to step away from like pictures so much in this talk, but this is my last sort of anatomical image that I want you to look at. And I actually bought this image because I thought it was so great, and I'm gonna use it more often. It shows us the cranial nerves coming out, actually exiting kind of downwards and anteriorly. The cranial nerves are exiting out the holes on the bottom of the cranium, and this one in particular is the jugular foramen. So on my skull here, you can't really see, but there's a little hole, and that's where your jugular vein, your internal jugular vein. So that's venous drainage from the head. That's fluids going out of the head, and also lymphatics, right? So drainage out of the head goes through this tiny, tiny hole, along with all of these cranial nerves that go direct out to the tongue, face, the throat. And you can see here cranial nerve 9, cranial nerve 10, cranial nerve 11, all depicted out this one hole. And as an osteopath, this is a really important concept, because we can see here, and I said on the slide as well, note the opportunity for compression or dysfunction at this tiny, tiny hole in the bottom. So by the way, the tongue really holds up this whole architecture. You can paint in the tongue to this picture, or imagine in your brain, if you're listening, that the tongue is lifting up the floor of your cranium. It's lifting up the palate, and therefore lifting up the cranial base and opening these structures where the drainage has to come out. By the way, if you're not draining in your head, that's where you get brain fog. You're not getting rid of waste product fast enough. Your gutters are clogged. This is where that clog happens. And in the cranial sacral mechanism, this joint here, the sphenobasilar symphysis, where the sphenoid meets the occiput, is really going up and down and up and down. It's pumping that cerebral spinal fluid in and out, bringing fresh oxygen, removing wastes from the brain and central nervous system and brainstem and all these important structures that we're talking about. So if your tongue is functioning and doing its job, it's lifting and elevating and acting as sort of that tent pole in the middle of your head to open up this head. On the contrary, you can imagine like the girl who fell off her bike and hit her face and broke all of her front teeth, that those forces can go right into the jaw, which is right there next to this area, to get compressed on the cranial base. Oops, face is falling apart. But you can imagine any facial compression would jam up this joint where the cranial nerves are exiting. Any orthodontia, so braces, headgear, etc., are you going to start closing this mechanism down? You're not going to be able to expand and contract and lift and really breathe in terms of a deeper nervous system, cerebral spinal fluid circulation. And you're going to ultimately compress this little tiny hole that all these things have to go through. And that includes your vagus nerve. So when your vagus nerve, if you've been through Shakti school with me, we talked a lot about the autonomic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is completely run by the vagus nerve. So essentially, there are some sacral nerves, but if the vagus nerve is compressed, you're not going to be getting optimal function. You're not going to be resting, digesting, healing, and feeling. So you can see here, and you can imagine that if there's any restriction in motion here at the palate, tongue, which myofascially is connected all the way down the anterior throat into the chest and beyond, that you're going to have restriction in motion here at this really important juncture, and that's going to be a big deal for your nervous system. Oh, one more thing I want to mention is the importance of breastfeeding, since we are here in my basically pediatric practice, and I've also had the chance to watch my little one breastfeed over the last 8 months. I've got a little baby girl, and she's been breastfeeding well, thankfully. And I'm really glad about that, because that's another thing that is an essential part of the development of this palatal widening, this elevation of the SBS and the cranial base. That's what really kind of trains the system to open up as the baby's growing and growing, and the brain is growing super rapidly. The cranium needs to grow with it. And if there's deep compressions, for instance, from vaginal birth or just being in utero or the contractions, that can definitely lock down this lower aspect. And so the breastfeeding mechanism, which although there are some bottles that can emulate breast, I've watched this firsthand for many hours in the middle of the night. There's like a lot of compressive forces, there's sucking, there's expansive forces. They're really working at that breast, as opposed to when I see bottle feeding, it's like they're more on the defense. They're just trying not to choke on the milk. They're trying to just handle the liquid, as opposed to kind of really going at the breast. And that action of sucking and working to get the breast milk to come down and the letdown and all that is the training wheels for us to start expanding through the cranium in this way. Now, I don't want to shame anyone who hasn't been able to breastfeed. I know it's a big deal for moms when they can't do it, and know that it's okay. If you weren't breastfed, it's okay. There's still a way to open up this mechanism. And that's kind of my theme for today, is that there is a way forward, a path forward to this, no matter what kind of compressions, what kind of trauma, what kind of breastfeeding you didn't have, what kind of birth trauma, whatever. There is a path forward to this. But that is the importance of breastfeeding. And you can see it demonstrated kind of in this structural context. So you're probably wondering, do I have tongue dysfunction? And there's a simple way to test this. And so we'll just do it right now. I want you to see if you can lift the tongue to the top of your mouth. Surprisingly, if you've been able to do this your whole life, you might be surprised that some people can't actually get it up there. So I'll try to do it with my tongue right now. This one's called the caves, where you can see your frenulum, right? And there's 2 holes on the side, right? Can everybody get the caves? There's 2 holes, so they call them caves. Some people can't. Some people can't elevate the tongue wide enough to get to see the 2 caves, or they can only get one side up at a time. And so that would be a sign of a tongue dysfunction. If you're unable to lift the palate. I see some of you looking into your camera, your phone cameras, to see like, can I do it? The other way, and that piece of tissue is called the frenulum. And we also have frenula up here in the lips and down there in the lower lips as well. And you can see if maybe you have a restricted frenulum or a tongue tie, as they say. Ankyloglossia is another word for it. By opening your mouth as wide as you can, open your mouth as wide as you can. And then while it's wide open, bring the tongue to the roof of the mouth. How far do you need to close your mouth in order to get that tongue to reach the roof? If it's more than half the distance, then you might be dealing with a little bit of a restriction in the base of the tongue or possibly the frenulum. Hard to say, but some people are looking a little bit more like they have a nice wide mouth and then they have to go this far to get their tongue to the roof of their mouth. So that's a restricted tongue, probably right there. If you're doing pretty well, if you can keep your mouth pretty open and also lift the tongue and not have it close that much. So know that you're pretty good in terms of tongue motion. Tongue function is a little bit different. So just because you have the range of motion doesn't mean your tongue is actually living at the top of the mouth. So I know we've already been playing with the tongue a little bit, but if you could just rest your tongue where it naturally lies, is the tongue on the bottom, or is it in the middle somewhere, or is it on the roof? So let's go to this next slide. Generally, we want our tongue to be on the roof. If it's on the floor, that means we're a little bit more in a sympathetic state, right? So more naturally, we might, during the day, we might more naturally have our tongue at the floor, or maybe more naturally have our tongue at the roof of the mouth based on what we're doing. And that's okay. So I'm doing this talk right now. I'm leading a bunch of people through something, I'm engaged. So my tongue's a little bit more towards the floor right now. And that's okay, because I'm in a place where I'm here performing, kind of being on task and using my sympathetics in not such a bad way, right? But for the rest of the time, you generally want your tongue on the roof of your mouth. Why? Because we want this expansion through our cranium. We want to be opening and nourishing the brain, opening and nourishing cranial nerve exit points. We want to be breathing. We want to be in parasympathetic state where we can rest, digest, heal, and feel. So where do we want the tongue? There's a spot in myofunctional therapy. Myofunctional therapy is basically like physical therapy for the tongue, right? And so the myofunctional therapists have this spot called the spot, where the tip of your tongue rests behind their two top front teeth. And so everybody find that spot with your tip of your tongue, and then you're going to want to seal the rest of your tongue to the hard palate and see how that feels. Is it hard? Is it difficult to feel? Does your tongue feel tethered to the bottom? Does it feel easy? Does it feel awkward? Does it feel anxious? You might be a high arched palate person and it's really not fitting in there. And so just notice how that feels. For the yogis and yoginis listening in, you might do a Jalandhara bandha, right? And that really lifts the back of the tongue up to the palate, and then release the tongue just enough so that you can get air through. And that's ideally where the tongue lives when you're sleeping mostly, but also when you're listening, when you're not talking, when you're not eating, when you're not drinking. You want to be here in that just backed off the Jalandhara bandha place, where the palate is as much on the hard palate. Sorry, the tongue is on as much on the hard palate as it can be without blocking off your airway. So I realize that not everybody will be able to do this. Might be really challenging for you already, and that's okay. So we're going to talk about paths forward. By the end of this, you're going to know what you might do to address some of these things with help or on your own, depending upon the kind of chronicity and the severity of it. The other thing I want you to do is notice that what you're doing with your mouth throughout the day really matters. And so not only is my tongue on the roof of my mouth or is it on the floor, but do you clench during the day? Do you try to find your teeth when you're washing the dishes or typing an email? What's your mouth doing? And a lot of us don't realize what we're doing. Like for me, I'm a cheek biter. I kind of like suck. And so I have those lines on the side of my mouth because I'm constantly sucking in and chewing, right? I was like a big gum chewer in high school. So a lot of chewing and clenching, even when I'm conscious, not when I'm asleep, but while I'm doing so, driving, whatever. So just take note of what you're doing. Also, are your lips open at rest? Is there a little bit of an opening, or are your lips sealed? That's another thing to take note of. And then when you do notice what you're doing, so for instance, my cheek biting, you want to do something else different. It's a behavior. It's just a behavior change, just like when you're trying to quit anything, when you're trying to quit smoking or eat candy or whatever it is the behavior is, you want to do something else instead. And so you want to replace it. You want to have something else healthy to do instead in that moment. So while I'm cheek biting in my car, I recognize it. And then what I do instead is lift the tongue to the roof of the mouth. So replace it with that proper tongue elevation. And it's going to have to happen like 100 times a day for you to start retraining that. And there's no myofunctional therapist, there's no osteopath, there's no dentist who can be in your mouth all day long, changing is for you have to change the behavior. So this is a big part of healing from a lot of these ailments that I mentioned earlier, is changing the way your tongue is behaving. So try this. If I bet you there's a lot of clenchers here, bruxism people at night, especially. So as you train your mouth during the day, you might start to do something different during the night. And so that's important to start shifting what you're doing in your subconscious dream state, is to start training during the day. So try this right now. Try to lift your tongue to the roof of your mouth as hard as you can, like press up, like imagining that you're lifting your intracranial structures up towards the top of your head with your tongue. Now try to bite at the same time. It doesn't work, right? So they're equal and opposite forces. So as you bulk up the tongue, which we'll talk about later, some other exercises you can do, as you beef up the tongue, just like if you were to go to the gym and beef up any other muscle that you're weightlifting with, you can beef up your tongue. It can be hypertrophied and it can be sitting higher in your mouth, and therefore can be kind of a nice inherent equal and opposite force to clenching when you aren't even paying attention, you're sleeping, etc. So that's the behavior. Here's a link that I'm going to have on my references later as well on the talk. But I like to give exercises to most of my patients, and it's I send them to a YouTube by a biological dentist named Audrey Yoon. I found her through another osteopath, and she's got these like 10 exercises, and that there's the YouTube link right there. I'm gonna have it later as well. So that brings us to myofunctional therapy, which is a whole faction of physical therapy for the tongue, mouth, throat, sinuses, face, etc. One big part of myofunctional therapy is actually getting you to breathe out of your nose, which we're going to get into next. Buteco, as well as alternate nostril breathing, Nadi Shodhana, is one aspect of it. The other way to really tone the exit points here for the vagus nerve is to hum. And I didn't put it on my talk today, but there's somewhere out there on a YouTube, there's a live functional MRI of a opera singer guy, like singing, la, and like you can see the whole like structure all the way down his throat into his head and cranium is vibrating with the tone that he is making. And so one aspect of myofunctional therapy that I think also is overlooked is humming or toning in the throat or singing. So know that as you, especially if you close the lips while you tone, you can feel that vibration. And the yogis, as Katie said, they've known this for a long time, the importance of those vibratory forces in the intracranial structures. And I'm just here to say, yeah, this is what it's doing to the anatomy. This is what it's doing to the function. The other thing is K and click sounds. So, and interestingly, my 8-month-old this week just started making those two sounds. She goes, and you can see her do the K's and the. So I'm pretty happy about that developmentally, because actually, if you've heard of Weston A. Price, he's a dentist who did a lot of data collection around the world, different cultures and oral functional facial development. And he found that the cultures that had clicks and pops and a lot of these sounds that we don't say a lot in English, but the cultures that did, some of the, I think like African tribes and different languages there have more sounds. And those, in his findings and his data collection, those cultures had these more beautifully developed round, open airways, round face, and great teeth, despite not having such great dental care. And part of the reason for that is the space in their mouth. So clicks and pops are super important to myofunctional therapy. Audrey Yoon so when I send people to YouTube for myofunctional therapy, the myofunctional therapy practitioners, I can imagine they're probably cringing if they're listening to this right now. It'd be like if you are a yoga instructor sending somebody who's never done yoga to YouTube to be like, just do this. Or sending somebody who's never given a massage, sending them a YouTube and saying, just do this, right? So there's a lot to this. And if you really want to dive in, I would suggest getting a session to make sure that it's right for your mouth, that your nervous system is ready for it, and not just going off onto a YouTube adventure. Because you could potentially, like I said, doing this work with the tongue is doing this work with your deep nervous system, brainstem stuff. So tread lightly when you go and look up a YouTube. If you're like me and you don't have maybe a ton of facial trauma and you just want to feel what it's like and know for reference, I do suggest checking it out on somebody like Audrey Yoon's myofunctional therapy. This one is myofunctional therapy for sleep apnea, which I think a lot of us have. But even if you don't have sleep apnea, the exercises that she has on there are pretty ubiquitous and helpful to open up the face. So if you need to find a therapist, there's plenty out there. One would be through the AOMT, the Association for Oral Functional Myotherapists, and that's that link there. And then there's a couple people out on Instagram, and I read a couple of good articles by someone called the Tongue Trainer on Instagram. So you can check them out as well for further info on that. But I did want to lead you through just a few of my favorite ones so that you can try them out right now without having to go into a YouTube. So let's dive into some of these together. So the sounds you probably were already doing when I was saying, so the ka and the click. We're going to go into the caves one, which is probably most people can benefit from the caves. So if you're one of these people who closed more than 50% or closed significantly when you put your tongue on the roof of your mouth, you can actually get quite a bit of range of motion back from doing just this one exercise. So the caves is just lifting and suctioning your tongue to the roof of the mouth and opening until that section gets so stretched that it clicks closed. And I don't know, I listened to a couple of other talks, and I don't know if the click comes through or not on the microphone. It wasn't on a couple of other talks, but you'll hear your tongue like unseal and click down. And so you do that, let's do that about 5 times. So you're just going to open until it stretches so far that it clicks, and then open. And you can really pull the tongue muscles back as well if you really want to stretch here. Do it a couple more times. So that you're getting a stretch all the way back to the posterior tongue. And that's another thing, is you have a posterior tongue tie. And so you can really stretch that fascia in the tongue. And osteopathically, I sometimes take my thumb and just drag it underneath that fascia, because it's really tight under there for all of us, really, unless you're doing these exercises a couple times a day, which I wouldn't jump into 2 times a day. I would just slowly check it out. The next one is just a tongue in cheek, where you're sticking your tongue out into your cheek and you're stretching that out. For me, it's really tight. I think because I bite my cheeks and there's that like line of almost scar tissue there. And so not only is it strengthening and hypertrophying the tongue, but it's stretching the cheek out, helping the face get wider. I'm just holding for 10 seconds as you put your tongue in your cheek. The other one is this sort of tongue in the lip one. Makes you look like a monkey. You're going to stretch for 10 seconds. on both the upper lip between the nose and the upper lip and the lower lip as well. Again, strengthening the tongue while you stretch the face out. And know that while you're doing this, you're really challenging your cranial nerves, your brainstem, your deeper centers as well. The other one I like to give, especially for the people who clench and they feel tight first thing in the morning, is just a little self-massage technique. And so using your knuckles here, these bigger knuckles, not the little ones, the bigger ones, I don't know why, it just works better. But you're going to go right under your cheekbone, right under that zygoma, into where the masseter is, this kind of deeper jaw muscles, and you're just going to drag your fists down the masseter. And you can open up your jaw while you do it. You can also kind of twist the fascia with your fists as well, and find those spots that are pretty tight. This is a nice thing for some people to do in the morning, especially after a long night of clenching, to just address and put some hands on your body to see if you can unravel some of those tendencies. My good friend and teacher, mentor, who does a lot of podcasting, who has talked on this subject, and I referenced her paper at the end of this. Her name is Michelle Veneziano. She's an osteopath in the Bay Area right now. I think she's actually in New Mexico as well. But she said that if you have a functioning tongue, a well-functioning tongue in the mouth, it's like having an osteopath in your head at all times. So these exercises that we're talking about, and these stretches and this rewiring of some sort that's going on, is like a permanent fix for you. For me, I don't have major oral facial trauma. And sometimes I will, as an example, I'll start to notice that my tongue is dropping to the floor of my mouth, or I'll start clenching more. I'll start feeling that. And I say, oh, I got to get back to my exercises. And so I will go back to this YouTube, or I'll just go to my go-to exercises that I just showed you and do several rounds. And that will be my fix for several weeks or several months. It doesn't work like that for everyone. And so you might find a different path for yourself, either through a therapist or through some of these, just finding your own rhythm with it. But I do find that it's a deep reset for most people to start doing this. And sometimes it's too much. So that's something to be aware of as well. Having a well-functioning tongue, though, is going to be beneficial to this process of healing for you and your nervous system, for sure. So that brings us to mouth breathing, which is another thing that I sometimes sense myself doing, right? Is I will wake up and my mouth is dry, and I realize that I've been mouth breathing for whatever amount of minutes or hours. And that's when I know I need to kind of get back in, get an osteopathic treatment. I need to get my tongue going, wake it up, etc. But mouth breathing has a lot of things that can be detrimental. So I'll just mention a couple of those things now. Here, and if you're looking at visuals, I have a picture actually from Michelle's article that she posted that I'm attaching as well to the notes here. But this is an example of a face of a person who nose breathes versus mouth breathes. And for those of you who can't see it, is basically this one woman who is looking like wide-cheeked, her mouth is closed, her eyes are wide open. I think that some people would say that she looks more beautiful in terms of our societal definition of that, But why does she look more beautiful? Probably because she's well rested. She's got this wide face. She's got ideal, normal cervical posture. She's got a straightness. She got a symmetry to her face. And that is how we define what beauty is, right? And so on the right, to contrast that, it's kind of like Cinderella and then like her stepsisters or whatever. They just like had a different look to them. Their noses were a little bit different, and I think they're always like smirking with their mouths open, right? So in the mouth breather side, we've got tired eyes, a crooked nose, an open mouth posture, a receding chin, a forward head posture. Why is her head forward? So that she can open up her airway and get oxygen in. It's a functional thing. It's something we naturally do. Little babies do it. Little kids do it when they don't have access to nasal breathing because they're sick or they have allergies or whatever. They're going to push their head forward to open up that airway. It's an automatic, a part of our autonomic response, which one of those cranial nerves controls neck movement for that reason. And so, yeah, she's got also, you can't see it from this side profile. She has a more narrow face. She probably has that high arched palate going on. And if you have any of these features, don't freak out. It's okay. We're just describing how these two things can really affect your posture, how these two things, nose breathing versus mouth breathing, can affect posture, can affect your look on your face. They can affect your nervous system, how tired you are, and then how often you have, for instance, how often you have tonsillitis, asthma, allergies, how often you have sleep apnea, how often you have bruxism. All of these things that I see so frequently in my office are often tied to, are you breathing through your mouth or are you breathing through your nose? So when I grew up, I definitely didn't have anyone correcting mouth breathing. It was just another hole that you could breathe through. And I think that's the truth for a lot of people still, is that we just didn't know. We didn't know that we were supposed to breathe through our mouth. We thought this is just another hole that we can breathe through, right? And the truth is that if you go back to breastfeeding and you look at a baby breastfeeding, they're really suckling. You have to breathe through your nose when you're breastfeeding, right? We're obligate nose breathers. We can't eat and grow and sustain ourselves and breathe at the same time. It's impossible. And I know this because I've seen little baby May, who had the flu or whatever in December, and she would have to take like 3 sucks and go and breathe a few times with her mouth open. And unfortunately, that is the case for a lot of people out there. They're not breathing through their nose. They can't breathe through their nose for A, B, C, D reasons, right? They broke their nose. They got hit with a basketball. They didn't breastfeed. They didn't develop these wide features. They had genetics. Both of their parents had narrow heads. There's so many reasons why you can end up in this boat, and it's not just because you were lazy and didn't breathe through your mouth or didn't breathe through your nose. Sorry. But know that it's definitely something that has been recognized in the literature, and there's hundreds and hundreds of studies on this, and it's been recognized in the mainstream science that we need to breathe out of our nose. We are obligate nose breathers, and there's a couple of reasons why, beyond us wanting to be beautiful and not beautiful, right?
A big special thanks to Kevin Carlisle of Goodbye Gemini, who wrote this beautiful podcast music, and to DJ Juan Pablo Jimenez in southern Spain for mixing it and making it magic.